Recognize the member from Member Cook, Tantramar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, thank you to the Minister and his team for being here this morning to answer questions in estimates. I want to start by asking some questions about the Climate Fund. From what was laid out in the budget speech, there were a few items identified that the Climate Fund, I believe, will be directed towards this year, which included research and development of advanced nuclear technology, redevelopment of Fundy K, reconstruction of the St. Andrews Wharf, and then resources to complete 75% of actions in the New Brunswick Climate Change Action Plan by the end of this year. I'm wondering if the Minister can let us know the amount that is budgeted for each of these items and how they were selected as a priority to address climate change.
Thank you very much for the member opposite the question. And to the Chair, of course, it should be noted that $36 million have been identified for the Climate Change Fund. The projects announced in the budget speech were part of a broad suite of projects that are being considered. The projects you referenced are related to climate change and fitting the funding program. You should also know that any projects funded need to meet the Climate Change Act Section 4.9.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to the Minister. I guess I'm wondering, since we are talking about budgets, is it possible to have even a rough estimate of how much is intended to potentially fund these projects? I'm specifically interested in understanding how much would be going towards the Fundy K and towards the St. Andrews Wharf, and specifically how they fit into the Climate Change Action Plan and meeting those goals. What are the benefits for adaptation or mitigation, or how do they fit within the parameters of how the Climate Change Fund is supposed to be used? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you once again to the member opposite for your questions, through the chair, of course. Taking action to reduce greenhouse gases is important, but it's equally important to enhance the resiliency of our province and take action to address the impacts of a climate change, of changing climate. Climate change adaptation is eligible expenditure for the Climate Change Fund under Section 9 of the Climate Change Act. The funding key that you asked about aspect is related to the seawall refurbishment, and both this project and the St. Andrews Wharf are to address the climate change adaptation. Funding key is approximately $3.2 million, and St. Andrews 1.4.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to the Minister for his response. I appreciate that. And I'm wondering if the Minister would be able to speak to the other part that was mentioned around the 75% of the actions in the plan being accomplished this year. Is there by any chance a list of exactly which actions are going to be completed this year? And if so, I guess that would be kind of a long list to read out. I feel free to read it out, or maybe the Minister would consider sharing that with us. Thank you.
to best answer your question across the way, there are 118 actions under the climate change plan, of which we have a target of 75% complete this year. We're working with the government departments to confirm deliverables and progress. In the progress report that was released in January, out of 118 action, I believe this would have been passed out in committee, 25 complete and 87 in progress as of March 2020.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to the Minister. If it is possible to have an idea of which specific actions are being targeted, I guess, what is included in that 75%, I would appreciate the Minister being able to table that, but I'm gonna move on. And I would assume that one of those targets is, or one of the items on the plan that's being worked on is number 13, specifically around having a carbon neutral government by 2030. And I know the Premier has said you're working to make sure that the government is carbon neutral by 2030. I was wondering, has there been a working group of deputy ministers from key departments like ELG, NRED, DTI set up to ensure that this can be achieved?
A particular action related to a carbon neutral government is an ongoing item, as the target for this action is 2030. We're working collaboratively with other departments to achieve this goal.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to the Minister. And I'm wondering, I understand that with climate change items that there does need to be collaborative work between departments, and I'm wondering, is there specifically a working group that has been set up to address this this target? Because it does require collaboration across different departments. It does require a lot of effort. And if there hasn't been a working group set up, how are you going to ensure that government is carbon neutral by 2030?
Thank you, member, for the question once again. We do realize the importance of this, and there's an informal working group with key departments as we recognize this is not just our department.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to the minister. I want to ask another question about the Climate Change Fund. I guess this is two questions. Is there a specific amount allocated within the Climate Change Fund to go towards implementing the Climate Change Action Plan, and if so, how much? And I'd also like to know, we've heard that $10 million is going to be put towards SMRs, and while I don't actually think that that's a great idea, I am concerned about the waste, the risk of it, and also that it's on a really long timeline, that even if it were a good idea, it actually doesn't help with our urgent climate change needs. But my question is the $10 million that's supposed to go towards it in this budget year coming from the Climate Change Fund? Thank you.
Member, can I ask one question, please? Clarification on the first question, please. Thank you.
Sure. I'm wondering, I guess basically how much of the Climate Change Fund is being allocated towards achieving the completion of the 75% of the action items in the Climate Change Action Plan this year? Thank you.
Thank you once again. The funding amount for the Climate Change Action Plan actions is a key priority. We're currently in the process of identifying the anticipated cost and prioritizing the actions. As you read in the budget speech, $10 million has been budgeted in this fiscal for SMRs.
Thank you to the Minister through the Chair. I guess I'd like to clarify whether the $10 million is coming from the Climate Change Fund towards SMRs. I guess that's, hopefully that's just a quick yes or no question.
You mentioned. Based on the climate change or the budget speech, yes, it's coming from Climate Change Fund. Thank you.
Okay, thank you through the Chair to the Minister. I want to circle back a little bit to action item 13 around a carbon neutral government by 2030. And I wanted to ask, in the Climate Change Action Plan, one of the tools that could be used to achieve this would be a carbon neutral government policy. And so I'm reading from the Climate Change Action Plan. A commitment to having no net impact on emissions is one example of a tool that can be used to enable this type of change. And there's an example given of British Columbia having used this type of tool. So I'm wondering, is this carbon neutral government policy in the works? And if so, what would the timeline be for us to see that implemented? Thank you.
As mentioned before, this particular action is an ongoing action. We're currently looking at next steps, and there's an expectation that policy will be a step in this process as we continue to move forward. A pathway to a carbon neutral government is being developed through this collaboration with other departments, as I mentioned before.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to the Minister. This is indeed a big action item. I'm glad that the Minister has indicated that it is being worked on, and I'm glad to hear a carbon neutral government policy is likely to be part of that. It would be nice to, I guess, to see some details of what exactly that looks like when it comes to, for example, the fleet or that of the government or the procurement policies. However, it seems that has not yet been developed at this point. I'm conscious of the time I have left, and I do want to ask some questions related to some other items. When we look at the other maritime provinces and indeed some other jurisdictions, we're seeing some increasingly ambitious goals around, for example, Nova Scotia committing to be carbon neutral by 2025. We're seeing other maritime provinces introducing incentives for electric vehicles. We already know that the other maritime provinces are way ahead of us in terms of spending on low-income energy efficiency retrofits. And so I wanted to ask about our spending on some of these items. Would the Minister be able to tell us what is in the budget for electric vehicle incentives, for renewable energy projects, and for energy efficiency projects? Thank you.
Through the Chair, all those items that you referenced would be eligible under the Climate Fund. As I mentioned earlier today, New Brunswick is exploring options for what an electric vehicle incentive program would look like. And regarding the Climate Change Action Plan and specifically for low income, this Climate Change Action Plan 33C commits government to mandate NB Power's Energy Smart NB to expand the capacity and programs to support low-income NBers that you mentioned earlier, to help those people. Since 2013, the provincial government has funded low-income energy savings program with $2 million per year from the Department of Social Development. The program continues to run and has retrofitted over 1,000 homes since 2017. That's great news. Social Development and NB Power made recent changes to this program to reduce the cost per home. This change is expected to allow 700 to 800 homes to be completed over the next 2 years. In 2021, carbon tax revenue has been allocated incremental to current $2 million funding. This fiscal year, an additional 1.5 has been allocated to low-income programs.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to the Minister for your answer. And it is good that type of project exists. I would argue it's still underfunded. I know there are wait lists, and I think this is one of those types of investments that can help people reduce their heating costs while simultaneously reducing emissions in the province. So it's really a win-win and good for the economy as well. So you're having money circulate in the local economy. So it'd be great to see even more invested in that. I think that's the direction we need to be going in terms of energy efficiency. That is not always prioritized as much as it should be in terms of budgets. I'm wondering, it seems as we're talking about some of these issues when it comes to the climate change fund, the climate change action plan, that while there is the plan and there are some concrete actions in there, that we're still a bit unclear on exactly how this is going, how some of these things are going to roll out, exactly which items are going to be completed and when, and I guess exactly how much funding is going to go towards them. I understand that it's a work in progress, but we're also here looking at what is budgeted for this year, and so it feels a little bit like there's a lack of concrete plans. And my sense from last year was that the climate change fund, it was almost retroactively filled out, and it didn't get to the full 36 million, and I wonder if government would consider maybe tacking on an extra 10 million this year to make up for the underspending last year. But I'm wondering, do you have a sense of, Mr. Minister, through the chair, a sense of exactly where the roughly, I guess, more than 20 million that's still in the climate change fund will go, and how it will be chosen, the projects? What type of criteria is used? What types of timelines are used for approving this? Is there a priority list of these are the most important items that we need to check off? And even sort of who can apply for this? I've been receiving a lot of messages from people wondering, well, I have ideas. There's projects over here that need funding. How do we get our hands on this money to move forward projects faster? Because things have moved too slow for too long, and I think everyone can agree on that for climate change. So I guess I'm wondering, what is the criteria for the spending? Is there a sense of where how this over 20 million that we haven't? I guess we said 10 million was going towards SMRs, and the 3.2 and 1.4 towards the seawall and St. Andrews. Where's that 20 million going to go, and how will the decisions be made for that? Thank you.
Remember, once again, for your questions. A lot of them together do the best they can to provide an answer for those. Spending on climate change initiatives is focused on projects that will result in greenhouse gas emissions reductions, climate change mitigation, or projects that increase resiliency for future climate conditions. And for 2021, climate initiatives dollars were part of the general revenue. However, government used the criteria in Section 409 of the Climate Change Act to guide eligible expenditures. These projects were further prioritized by considering additional criteria, such as whether it furthers an action of the New Brunswick Climate Change Action Plan, protects public safety and human health, protects resilient communities and households, For example, energy efficiency, clean energy, and climate preparedness. Supports vulnerable populations, such as low income and other communities likewise. Leverages external funding, supports economic growth and long-term job creation, and supports low carbon, natural and green infrastructure. So for 21-22, dollars be located in the Climate Change Fund, and therefore spending will need to meet the criteria outlined in Section 4.9 of the Climate Change Act, as well as other requirements of the Act. Additional priorities of the projects will occur considering the criteria mentioned as above and other considerations. As well, projects will run through the Climate Change Fund Advisory Board, who will review the projects and make recommendations to the Minister based upon prioritization exercise. With respect to public access, spending is focused on government initiatives and projects. This funding is reinvested in climate change initiatives that will benefit all NBers and not just specific sectors or of activities or business. There are other programs already existing for non-for-profit organizations and groups that can apply, such as the Environmental Trust Fund, which will continue to fund climate-related projects under its current application process. Furthermore, energy efficiency programming is always available to consumers, businesses, and industry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister, thank you. I am going to ask one more brief question, and I think then the time will have expired even just before lunch. But I want to first say thank you to the Minister and his team for being here this morning and for all of the work that you do. I guess the last question I wanted to ask was to ask the Minister for his personal opinion when we're talking about the Climate Change Fund. Does he think it's acceptable to not spend all of the carbon tax revenues on climate change initiatives as happened last year? So I guess I was looking for the Minister's personal opinion on that. So thank you again, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Officer, for the question. I would like to say that we're here for estimates today, and this past year, 2021, was certainly unique for all sorts of reasons. It's not our intention. It's our intention to invest as much as we can this coming year on all projects for all sectors, and all projects across the province as best we can. And there's still flexibility in that as well. But the Climate Change Fund is separate and alone now, so we use that money for the projects coming up and as they come in, and do the best we can. Thank you, and thank you for your questions today.